Hello there friends and enemies, and welcome back to Weird Deck Techs. Today we're going to be looking at an old GX era archetype, Arcana Force. Used by Sartorius in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, the Arcana Force cards give us a look at the Yu-Gi-Oh! World's version of Tarot. The archetype's design elements reflect this by revolving around coin tosses. You toss a coin, and based on the result, you get a specific effect. These effects might be detrimental or beneficial to you depending on the card and the type of toss that you get. Arcana Force is an archetype much like Aliens that I have always been interested in and never really looked into. I never thought they were good when I was a kid, but as an adult I can kind of see their potential. So let's go ahead, take a look at the archetype, and see what we might think about it. So here we have my Arcana Force deck build, and if you haven't been here before, here's how it works. I take the deck and try to build it both as pure of an archetype as I can and as close to 40 cards as I can. We're going to go over every single card and what they do, we're going to show a little bit of gameplay, and then we're going to talk about our thoughts on the deck and the archetype as a whole. So let's get started with one copy of Arcana Force EX, the Dark Ruler. Cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned from your hand by sending 3 monsters you control to the graveyard, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. When this card is special summoned, toss a coin and gain the appropriate effect. Heads, this card can make a second attack during each battle phase, but if it does so using this effect, change it to defense position at the end of the battle phase. Its battle position cannot be changed until the end of your next turn. Tails, if this card is destroyed, destroy all cards on the field. 3 copies of Arcana Force EX, the Light Ruler. Cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned from your hand by sending 3 monsters you control to the graveyard. Cannot be special summoned other ways. When this card is special summoned, toss a coin. And if it's heads, when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can target 1 card in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. If it's tails, during either player's turn, when a spell trap or monster effect that targets this card is activated, this card loses exactly 1000 attack, and you negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. I think of the Light Ruler as the boss monster of this deck. Both of its effects just seem to be really good. 3 copies of Arcana Force 21, The World. I believe that's 21, I could be wrong. When this card is summoned, toss a coin. Heads, during your end phase, you can send 2 monsters you control to the graveyard to skip your opponent's next turn. Tails, during your opponent's draw phase, add the top card of their graveyard to their hand. 3 copies of Arcana Force 18, The Moon. When this card is summoned, toss a coin. Heads, during your standby phase, you can special summon 1 moon token. Tails, during each of your end phases, select 1 monster you control and give control of it to your opponent. 3 copies of Arcana Force 15, The Fiend. You can discard this card, add 1 light barrier from your deck or graveyard to your hand. If this card is summoned, toss a coin. If it's heads, when an attack is declared involving this card, you can target 1 monster on the field, destroy it, and if you do, inflict 500 damage to its controller. If it's tails, if an attack is declared involving this card, destroy all monsters on the field. 2 copies of Arcana Force 14, Temperance. During damage calculation in either player's turn, you can discard this card, you take no battle damage from that battle. When this card is summoned, toss a coin. The effect lasts while this card is face up on the field. If it's heads, have all battle damage you take. If it's tails, have all battle damage your opponent takes. 2 copies of Arcana Force 7, The Chariot. When this card is summoned, toss a coin. If it's heads, if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can special summon that monster to your side of the field. If it's tails, your opponent gains control of this card. 3 copies of Arcana Force 6, The Lovers. When this card is summoned, toss a coin. If it's heads, this card can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of an Arcana Force monster. If it's tails, you cannot tribute summon Arcana Force monsters. 1 copy of Arcana Force 4, The Emperor. When this card is summoned, toss a coin. If it's heads, all Arcana Force monsters you control gain 500 attack. If it's tails, all Arcana Force monsters you control lose 500 attack. I think the ability to give your monsters a boost in attack is pretty good, even if it is a what-if scenario. But I feel like it wouldn't be the most powerful thing, so I wanted to put this card in the deck, but I kept it at 1 so that it's not flooding my hand. 2 copies of Arcana Force 3, The Empress. When this card is summoned, toss a coin. If it's heads, each time your opponent normal summons or sets a monster, you can special summon 1 Arcana Force monster from your hand. If it's tails, each time your opponent normal summons or sets a monster, send one card from your hand to the graveyard. Last for the monsters, we have Arcana Force 0 the Fool. This card cannot be destroyed by battle, and it cannot be changed to defense position, except with a card effect. When it's summoned, you toss a coin. If it's heads, negate your card effects that target this card and destroy them. If it's tails, negate your opponent's card effects that target this card and destroy them. Moving on to spell and traps, where you're starting with spells with 3 copies of Light Barrier, a field spell. During your standby phase, toss a coin. If the result is tails, the following effects are negated until your next standby phase. When you summon an Arcana Force monster, choose which effect to apply without tossing a coin. If an Arcana Force monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you gain life points equal to the destroyed monster's original attack. Even with it being a gamble effect that can work or cannot work for a turn, it is very much a good idea, in my opinion, to have the field spell for this specific deck, or any deck like this, to make the requirements for the modular effects just not matter and just have you treat them like regular modular monsters. I think that that is fun. Or maybe not fun, but at least practical. 3 copies of Arcana Reading. Toss a coin and apply this effect. If Light Barrier is in your field zone, you can choose the effect instead. Heads, you can add 1 card from your deck to your hand that has a coin tossing effect except for Arcana Reading. Tails, your opponent adds 1 card from their deck to their hand. You can banish this card from your graveyard. Immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon 1 Arcana Force monster. You can only use each effect of Arcana Reading once per turn. 2 copies of Cup of Ace, and yes, Cup of Ace is part of the archetype. Toss a coin. If it's heads, you draw 2 cards, and if it's tails, your opponent draws 2 cards. Moving on to the end of the deck, we have traps, starting with Tour of Doom, a continuous trap, which, much like Cup of Ace, is 100% part of the archetype. During your opponent's standby phase, toss a coin. Heads, your opponent cannot normal summon or flip summon until the end phase. Tails, you cannot normal summon or flip summon during your next turn. 2 copies of Arcana Call. Select 1 Arcana Force monster you control, remove from play 1 Arcana Force monster from either player's graveyard. Until the end phase, the selected monster's effect becomes the removed monster's effect for the same coin toss result. Ending out the deck, we've got 3 copies of Reversal of Fate. Select 1 Arcana Force monster you control, that monster's effect is now treated as the opposite coin toss result. Reversal of Fate doesn't need to be at 3, but I could see this becoming useful, especially if you happen to be playing this deck and finding yourself tossing the coin not in your favor. There we have the deck, so let's go ahead and take a look at how this deck might play. Alright, so here we have our first hand, and honestly, it doesn't look too bad from where I'm sitting. We can, of course, go ahead and set Reversal of Fate and Arcana Call. We can save Arcana Reading if we'd like, but activating it on our turn just to see if we can get something seems like a good idea, especially if we're going first. Flipping the coin looks like it's going to get us a heads, so of course we get to add an Arcana Force monster to our hand. And not even Arcana Force, really any card that has a coin tossing effect. Just to keep it simple, we're going to add Light Barrier right into our hand. But if there's any card that you think would be better, you can add any of those cards to your hand. Activate Light Barrier just to have it out, and then we can go ahead and normal summon the Empress and use the Empress's coin toss effect. And it looks like we got heads, so we're going to get the benefit of the Empress for being able to special summon an Arcana Force monster from our hand whenever our opponent normal summons or sets a monster. Which means, during our opponent's turn, we can go ahead and normal summon the Emperor. When it's summoned, of course, we have to toss the coin, and hopefully it doesn't go outside of our favor. Let's say it's our opponent's turn and they summoned, so we're going to go ahead and summon our Emperor. And when he gets special summoned, we toss the coin, and let's see what we get. Oof, Tails is not going to help us out. However, we can activate Reversal of Fate since we have it on our field. We can make that a heads, make our monsters bigger if we really want to. So let's go ahead and draw just to see what we would get on our next turn. And we pulled the Lovers, which I think is perfectly fine. Not the best card we could have pulled, but, you know, it does something. So there we have the gameplay. That being out of the way and taking a look at this deck doesn't seem that bad to me. It seems like it could be a fun deck. Obviously, you'd want to put anything in here that could help you with your coin tosses. I'm sure that this game has enough cards revolving around coin tosses that there's stuff that helps you out getting a result that you want. A problem that was really apparent in the gameplay section is that this deck, latently in the archetype, doesn't have an extra deck, but it could really easily benefit from an extra deck, I think. So putting in some Link monsters, some XCs, might help you out a little bit more. And of course, as with every deck, there's always the staple cards that you could use. However, it seems like this deck being the way that it's built, you might want to stick with keeping to the coin tossing effects and making them go your way. And if you do add any staple cards, you probably just want to add something that helps negate other people trying to stop you from doing what you want to do. Overall, I like Arcana Force as an archetype. I probably wouldn't play this deck, but I think as an archetype it's super interesting. It's one of the fun game design elements that I like from this game, and this was such an early archetype in the history of the game that I think this might be one of the first archetypes that actually went into a fun little design space, and I really enjoy it. You can really tell that when they were designing these cards, they were trying to figure out how to, encompass the way that tarot works, and I feel like they did a relatively good job. That is all for the video. Thank you so much for watching. How do you feel about Arcana Force after watching this video? And if you've played it before, let me know how the deck treated you. I hope the rest of your day is wonderful, and until next time, drink your water.